Daniel's here. Correctivity in homeostasis, thereby systemic autonomy for European genus and species. Okay, then. Let's get settled in here. And welcome to our audience. We need to talk some tonight about the concept, and actually that's what it is, a concept of borders and boundaries. Conceptual as opposed to the Cartesian purity spiral of modernity. Which confronting a reactionary like guest worker from Majority Rights, for example, and one as philosophically unskilled and unprepared as guest worker is, means recognizing that we're dealing with patterns, and while not altogether arbitrary, or which are open-ended and call for lines to be drawn. Now, those lines are not to the chagrin of someone like that, as an example, but he is just a perfect example of the right-wing reaction, the Cartesian reaction, and its failure to deal with the circumstance that we're confronted with. Those lines are not 1,000% empirical and not unassailable 1,000%, even if they are warrantably assertable to draw. Now we're talking about, say, a fence or a wall, which designates the boundaries of a land, of a people. It's man-made. It's not a direct phenomenon of nature. It's constructed by people. Now, this becomes very interesting. This issue, it continues to be interesting and eminently relevant in terms of what's going on and making sense of the war in Ukraine. And in proper response to some rather stupid contestations by con ops, aka spiritual mamzer, towards the end of the last podcast. it also raises some interesting points with regard to commentary by Morgoth on uh, the migrants, not the migrants, the refugees from the war, and how they might be treated in crossing over borders and bounds. They might be treated differently. Okay then. So this is the issue of borders and boundaries that we're going to be settling into, and it's very important. The war in Ukraine, Putin's war against Ukraine, demonstrates in a deep way, as I see it, the soundness of the platform that we've set out here in making sense of this kind of thing, and prompting, suggesting, as it were, avenues of solution. Now, what we hear, one underlying philosophical mistake coming from the West, and you'll hear this underlying the discussions of Mearsheimer, of Kotkin, and of Timothy Snyder. These are some of the big shots in international relations. There's a red cape, what I call a red cape, a misrepresentation, a distortion of an underlying concept, which will turn off people of goodwill, normal people who seek homeostasis, and cause them to chase that red cape, and with it, the underlying concept. Now, the concept that I'm talking about that's being red caped by the likes of Kotkin, Mearsheimer, and Timothy Snyder is correctivity itself, which we sort of named this podcast after. Now, they're getting this idea from the American pragmatists, specifically John Dewey. And in essence, it's a good idea. It's a very good idea. And like all good ideas, my working hypothesis maintains, and all ideas for maintaining a group of people with amidst challenges. It's been misrepresented, distorted by the kosher folks, even weaponized. And I believe that that's the case with correctivity and John Dewey's notion. He's not a kosher folk, but of course I'm always doing a dual entry. Our disingenuous or naive sorts, whether they're right-wing reactionaries or liberal, engaged in liberal hubris, which would be the case of Dewey, still not freed from Enlightenment precepts enough. He would hold that democracy and democratic input would provide the means of correction. You know, if the political system is going off track and threatened with runaway to where the system altogether falls apart, there will be various people providing input to get it back on track, to homeostasis, as I like to say. I don't know if Dewey would use that word. He might. I don't remember. I don't recall him using that word. But the concept of correctivity would work like that. Now, here's the problem, and the problem begins with Dewey and Dewey's case. That, so far as I know, he would extend the franchise, that is, the capacity to vote, almost indefinitely. I don't know if he would extend it to non-residents or, non-citizens, which we'll get into that in a second. But he would extend it as far as possible, believing that that's going to make the system as corrective as possible. Now, you're probably combining common sense together with experience to say that's not really working. But then, especially when you combined, abuses of that notion by the likes of under kosher auspices, right? It's being red-caped, as I like to say, on top of the civic nationalism that they've cultivated or promoted of America, nation of immigrants and all. Whether the founding fathers intended that to be, well, they didn't intend it really to be that way. It was supposed to be a nation for free white men, right? But they weaponized that. They red-caped the notion of the franchise to where it's, of course, to include suffragettes, women, which I wouldn't necessarily object to, but and blacks got it even before women did, by the way. But here's this is the thing, is that they are liberalizing this idea to where borders are not being maintained by this ongoing extension of the franchise, to where voter registration is being called a violation of civil rights and so on, and even illegal immigrants are allowed to vote. But the point is that the idea is being has been extended and abused and manipulated, and it's been abused by simply bringing in new voters, where, say, the Democrats, who are have traditionally been the anti-white party, can turn into just the permanent occupiers of power. And we're going to get in a second to how that bears upon the notion of marginals at the borders. But so you got the opening of borders to, and Tony Blair did the same thing, right? He is opening borders so that the conservatives couldn't win, extending the franchise, as it were. Now, this is a red caping of the idea of correctivity. Like I said, the idea of a red cape is to take a good idea, to distort it so that it's weaponized and abusive of the natives, right? And then turn them off to the whole idea altogether to get them to react and fight against the very underlying notion of a kind of democratic correctivity. So what I'm saying is, you hear, like when Mearsheimer is discussing, and Kotkin and Timothy Snyder are discussing this war, for example, and that this is what should happen one day, and these are the ideals that we're defending, or just civic nationalism and the and extended franchise, and that how that makes us powerful and strong. Well, it might be powerful in the sense of a resource being an ancient resource being burned and providing fuel. It's powerful in that sense. Yeah, it might win wars until the time as it burns itself out, until it destroys its own vitality, until it's no longer homeostatic. Right? It runs into stasis. But okay, so these are the underlying philosophical errors. You can call it an epistemological blunder that the liberal West is operating on, and the liberalism is functioning with. And it's going to meet up with a stasis, and that is a reaction in the case of Putin here. Putin would be exactly a right-wing reaction, exemplifying a right-wing reaction. Defining the right wing as a quest to narrow accountability in quest of unassailable warrant to do something. And there you have, Vladimir Putin acting in this evil war against the Ukrainian nation, against Ukrainian autonomy, the Ukrainian people, against their ethno-nationhood, against their homeostasis, their autonomy. See, you see the superiority of this platform and the unit of analysis, which looks at the interaction. It's not like this really stupid medieval kind of Judeo-Christian analysis that you have from, Father Raphael Johnson and talking to Mark Collette, where Russia is somehow the good guy in this against the liberals of the West. It's looking beneath and above the mistakes of the West. Not saying that the West isn't in control of this rampant liberalism. It is. The elitists are. Okay, the internationalists. But these right wingers are amazingly siding with Putin in this. The Orthodox medievalist and Mark Collette and some others, just amazingly. Or if not siding with him outright, just like ridiculously sympathetic to him. There should not be sympathy for him. As I said, if the Ukraine put down, if NATO installed itself in Ukraine, if they installed nuclear weapons, if they had supplies of biological weaponry, if half the citizenry were given Javelin anti-tank missiles, that still would not be an excuse for Putin to do this. There's just no motive to just up and attack Russia. In other words, unless you give them a reason, there's no reason why the West should attack Russia. Now, you could say, okay, you have an argument that this creeping liberalism, yeah, they got to defend against it. Yes. So does Ukraine, so does every nation. But is war the way to do it? Probably not. Let's say definitely not. Okay, so coming back to the idea of borders and bounds and how the kosher folks are masters of looking after their own homeostasis and infiltrating others with their diaspora, and disrupting others. It's like so you got, and getting them into a reactionary position where they can manipulate them. So you got Mark Collette, whose favorite book is Mein Kampf. God, what an idiot. Siding with Putin. Now we can. I fully agree that I can't side with the Ukrainian president. What's his name? The the kosher guy, in calling for Ukraine to fight to the death, and let alone a no-fly zone, which would bring NATO into the war. Basically, that'd bring the West. That would be World War III, the beginning of, and maybe worse as the Chinese have been saying that it could threaten nuclear war. No, they should not fight Putin directly. At this point, let him set up his puppet government. But let me come back to the issue of borders and boundaries again. As I was saying, and how disingenuously that issue's been handled in my hypothesis, in my working hypothesis, by the YKW. Not only will they try to extend the franchise, in other words, abuse the concept of democratic correctivity, extending it indefinitely, bringing in new people, if that's what it takes, to fund the Democratic Party, to fund whoever it is. I guess the Labour Party in the UK. But they will promote. They will abuse the idea, the very idea of compassion and normalization of marginals, which is a great idea. And it, so far as I know, comes from Heidegger's student Gadamer. The importance of marginals in the grand scheme, in the majority scheme too, to where marginals, of course, you're talking about, you're bearing upon the issue of borders and boundaries, aren't you, when you talk about marginals? Because you're talking about people at the margins of a border or a boundary. And you're supposed to be talking, if you're talking about marginals, you're talking about, you would think, people who are just within the bounds of your margins, right? But that's not who the YKW, that's not who YKW academia, through the Frankfurt School and whatnot, have presented as marginals for the past several decades, right? They pervert that concept to where marginals are those just outside the system who should, for some reason, be let in to enrich it, right? Or people who are downright antagonistic to the mainstream, to the the normal population. Those are supposed to be marginals now, not people who are just like, almost, a bit unfairly pushed to the side, or a bit unjustly pushed to the side and pressed up against the margins. So the concept is that you have a swirling, ongoing system that presents everybody, puts everybody into the position of being a marginal from time to time. Even people who are marginal because they're better, they're smarter, they're stronger, they're more capable. They become somewhat marginal to the general population. So it's not, just about like, it's not a care for people who are, very unfortunate and the freaks and whatnot. But it does look at those marginals, but for a couple important reasons, because they are going to be a bit more attuned, or are attuned, if not more attuned, to the boundaries and where the boundaries are being impacted. They're going to know where the shoe pinches. They're going to be almost like centurions on the frontiers, providing valuable feedback to where the system is in jeopardy of breaking down. They're going to also have perspective, a perspective on the whole system, perhaps. And I don't want to overly valorize them necessarily, but these are possibilities, certainly. But the thing is that if they're loyal, if they're doing the best they can, if they're accountable to the group system, to the homeostasis, they should be respected as members, not pushed outside the boundaries, as would happen with the kind of centrifugal force of, sheer Darwinism that doesn't respect the relative interests of a group in a human sense of praxis, right? Sheer modernity, running roughshod in the name of Darwinism. That's just the way it is. Okay, so this concept of marginals has been abused. That's another thing that's impacting the boundaries. That's where you get all this freakish talk, and where, and it's meant maybe semi-consciously, maybe deliberately, by the people who hate European people, to turn us off. Like all red capes are meant to turn us off to this really good concept, which is also part and parcel of correctivity, of homeostasis, of our systemic autonomy, genus and species, European people. Now that should be a very satisfying idea to the likes of Guest Worker and Bowery, with their empirical kind of reactionary bent in response to these red capes, because you're getting near as empirical as you can get when you're talking about that. These personages of the group boundary, but no, that's not what happened with Guest Worker. He tried to portray me. When I'm talking about this, I'm just talking about a group and having boundaries, and where, for example, and just talking about this concept, because I talked about marginals. He tried to say, he's always looking for whatever he can to misrepresent what I say, to pervert what I say, to strawman what I say. Because I did that, he turns around and says that, well, you're representing a marginal perspective, and the market has spoken that it doesn't want your perspective. The man's an idiot. The man has no business. He should near anything philosophical. The market hasn't spoken. kosher marketing and its red capes has spoken, and those reacting to its red capes has spoken. Okay, if I sound angry, it's because I am. It's because it's really important, and these are such critical matters that can't bear with a narcissistic egomaniac obfuscating the resource of understanding that our people need. And it's just one of many, many examples that this asshole, of this asshole's straw manning and obstruction. But that's aside for now. It bore upon this one issue of marginals and how that concept comes to bear. It doesn't mean that you're not attending to the broad patterns of the majority, of the normal folk. Normals are still normals and queers are still queer and all that. It's not a marginal perspective, in other words. We're talking about group homeostasis and how that's achieved. So, the concept of correctivity. Now, again, this is going to be maybe somehow unsatisfying to someone in the throes of Cartesian anxiety, a wailing modernist like guest worker. They can't, they don't see these lines. They can't, they can't draw lines that can't be challenged by the kosher folks. But there are these patterns, and there are lines that are warrantably assertable, that are operationally verifiable. It doesn't take anything like his sweeping aside. Okay. Now that there are, we say that there are these boundaries and these distinctions, these borderline and boundary distinctions that are warrantably assertable, that are operational verifiable, that are eminently valid. We come to, and he's con ops or spiritual mamzer, or whatever he wants to call himself now, is a combination of stupid and bad, bordering on evil in his attempts to misconstrue and obfuscate what I'm saying here. I talked about last time, toward the end of last time's show, I discussed, the concept of, again, of a group, a species being able to, that it should be able to maintain itself, maintain its kind, and that they could, in asserting that and agreeing upon that amongst themselves, that they say, if a person who was born of the group wants to outmarry, okay, they can do that, but they would lose their group membership. Whereas if they wanted to intermarry and impose a new admixture upon the group without their consent, that would impose involuntary contract and by definition be a motion to enslave, a motion of supremacy and to enslave the people. Enslave the native people. In Konops, okay, he tried to say that I was being cruel because I'm the one being cruel because I don't want to be. Our people don't want to be enslaved. We want to maintain our species. Obviously, I'm not the cruel one, but here's where he's going to try to go and did try to go. He would try to go, and it's very predictable that they would try to say that I'm all about, or this platform is all about purity, 1,000% purity, to where we would begin manifesting pathologies of inbreeding. And furthermore, he said that, and this is important. This is a crucial thing where Konops is absolutely defeated, and I don't need to talk to him ever again because he's that stupid and that evil. I'm going to get to the word evil in a second too. So he would try to say that I'm advocating purity to the point of inbreeding. And I talked about, so far as I know, I'm not a scientist, but as far as I know, fifth cousins is about optimal. Maybe it's sixth cousin. And this is something that we would confer, or maybe seven, something that we would confer with scientists about. But scientifically, that probably is optimal. What's not scientific, or let's say it's not, how can I put this? You can sit back and observe what happens, I suppose, in this kind of liberal free-for-all. People are just interbreeding in panmixia whenever the world, see what happens, right? And I'm not saying that you can't do that. So I don't even see how I'm not scientific. And we're to come back to the issue of marginals here again. But he is saying there should be no control. There should be no border control. You shouldn't manage your population. No control variable. Note that. He's trying to prohibit that. And say that should never be. Now, who is unscientific? Me or Konops? Okay, then. He's going to try to say that I'm a purity spiral. No, I'm not. I don't know to what extent a modicum of Asian this, that, or the other can't be assimilated. And that would be a question for, I suppose, to be discussed in a conversation between scientists and philosophers and so on, and sociologists. How much admixture is optimal. If indeed the threat of inbreeding comes up, and so far as I know, I understand 14,000 people, and there's not a big problem. That's not a lot of people. And I'm not averse to that conversation. I'm not, if someone is, like I said, 3% something, I'm not going to say no, that can't be a member of my group anyway. If somebody else wants to say that they want to keep things that pure, I'm okay with that too. But that's not the concept that I'm working with. And I would, in fact, have our scientists look into the optimal marriage partners. They would be attending to problems of inbreeding. I don't anticipate a whole lot of problem with that, but they would attend to that. Okay then. So you're talking about ethnic genetic interests to a large extent here, and this is where Morgoth was trying to go with the refugee crisis from the Ukrainian war, and noting this thing that's infuriating with the way the kosher media would handle it, of course. Oh, so you're all hospitable to Ukrainians, are you? Because they're white. But how did you feel about the Middle Easterners when Lukashenko tried to sick them on you, or the Sub-Saharans when now you're all about, well, that's incredibly obnoxious and infuriating. And of course, we Europeans would say, well, because they're Europeans and they don't threaten to, that is to say, their kind is closer in ethnic genetic sense, and therefore not as potentially disruptive to our species, to our homeostasis, more assimilable. How does Frank Salter's theory go? I believe that it's like the further you go, the more it's like basically killing. It's equivalent to killing a native child, a native European child. It's that bad. It's a serious matter. Okay, so Morgoth sort of awkwardly, and it does because awkwardly draws this analogy without. He says, "Well, the reason why we care about Europeans more is because they're because of ethnic genetic interests. They're closely related." Now, the problem is, and this is where it all goes way philosophically way over the head of guest worker and Morgoth. The problem is, of course, that the enemy can just say, well, the Russians and the Ukrainians are even more closely related genetically than they are to many Europeans. Maybe not to Poles, but or Slovakians, but certainly to Western Europeans. And here they are, killing each other. The Russians. I don't want to. I don't want to present Ukrainians as equal partners and to blame in this. They're not. This is Putin's evil. Okay, so how does their ethnic genetic interest says that they should be more sympathetic, right? Here's the deal, or here's what I begin to understand, because I remember majority rights. We had a geneticist talking there at one time named Graham Lister, and he said that in a liberal society, or let's say the threat of a liberal society as you have coming toward Putin, siblicide, that is, say, siblings killing each other, is a winning move. So there's nobody more closely related than siblings, right? But if the context is liberal, then the concept of ethnic genetic interest doesn't hold up. Then it's then it's the individual out for himself, clearing off the lifeboat, the lifeboat, his personal lifeboat, and that goes to what I was saying to Conops, that what is going to increase genetic fitness and going to be the right thing to do in terms of selection, scientifically, as he would say, is going to depend on the context. And he said, yeah. Well, hermeneutics, that is to say, the means we can misguide or guide through rule structures, through narratives, through concepts, that we can misguide or guide, re-guide, reconstruct our homeostasis, or misguide it into runaway. Right. That can change what is optimal, what is the winning move for an individual. And this is what I've been saying. So you have in late modernity this mixed situation, this eminently thrown situation, this tumult, the disorder of late modernity in America, where boundaries and borders are ruptured as fictions of the mind, as John Locke would have it, and should yield to the technology of individual rights, as John Locke would have it, or civil rights as weaponized by the YKW, or groups being considered, or at least white groups, and discrimination thereupon being considered just, racism by the, the Trotskyist concept. Then you have a profound disorder where, it can seem, in some sense is, if it's going to stay that way, the best move for, but seemingly the best move for a young girl to produce a mulatto baby. The situation becomes mulatto supremacist, and you have, and they're promoting this universal maturity. They're going to, how do they say, heal the world of its, evil homeostasis. if it's evil, um, wish to survive as distinct cons. And while I'm chiding them, you know, let's throw G.W. Bowen that is a good idea with the concept of the Gentile undifferentiated other, undifferentiated to no end, to where even gender distinctions, sex distinctions is the final stage where that distinction doesn't exist as a group distinction, right? It's not even man and woman. I think that's a good one on his part. Okay, so my point is that ethnic genetic interests in terms of loyalty and care about those who are closest to you, yeah, that is a natural tendency, no doubt, but it can and has been, in fact, disrupted hermeneutically, as it were. And it's all the more reason for us to get a hold of hermeneutics to where we can establish a reconstructive hermeneutic, one that is conducive to our homeostasis and systemic autonomy. We have to get used to this concept of unionization. Mick says, you're coming through clear with a bit of distortion when you speak louder. What's your mic and gain staging? I don't know what my mic and gain staging is. Thanks for the feedback, Mick. At least it can be heard. These things that I'm saying are well, anyway. Hopefully it doesn't ruin the show, whatever distortion. So you have these where are we? You have these red capes, these misdirection. And the important red caping misdirection that came to mind this evening is correctivity itself and the abuse of the concept of democratic correctivity, and to where it should be a notion of conservatism, where you're using this correctivity to conserve the system, right? As a means of homeostasis, which is a conservative notion. Ecology itself is a conservative notion. I mean, conservative in the good sense of conserving your species, your people. I hate when people say, "What are we conserving?" We're conserving ourselves, for fuck's sake. Pardon my French, but I get angry. And on the contrary, they're using that disingenuously to instigate liberalism. Just runaway liberalism. It's correctivity. Extend the franchise to anybody and everybody, and then if that still doesn't get the anti-white party to win, then you invite in the non-whites and the anti-whites. That's the way to do it, right? So here's the thing. when, as opposed to right-wing reaction, where you have a despot like Putin, an evil despot like Putin, doing what he's doing, trying to establish unassailable warrant, or believe in unassailable warrant to do this. The quintessence of a right-wing reaction. You broaden the union against such despot to an optimal degree, not indefinitely, not just everybody, including the YKW, so they could do their little, usury or whatever else they're going to do. Of the nation, of the people, the native people, not Zelensky or whatever the hell the Ukrainian president's name is, the kosher president, of the native people. You have persons who are able to pass certain tests of civics, of the history of the people, understanding, certain dynamics, perhaps, of economics, whatever. It doesn't matter. Just some basic tests they're able to pass. In other words, the franchise isn't open to just anybody, and you probably have to be of a certain age and experience. You don't have 16-year-olds voting, right? And I wouldn't say no to women either. If a woman could pass these tests, if she understands these things, and most importantly, understand there's certain things that are just not up for vote. It's not up for vote that you're going to open that the borders are just going to be open, the boundaries are going to be open. That's not up for vote. You can discuss with your scientists whether it's benign and perhaps even helpful to introduce a modicum of this and that kind of person. But the borders are not open. There's accountability there. Not only that, and then you begin to look at the concept of voting itself. So you have a delimited group who is democratically involved in this correctivity that is geared towards homeostasis and group maintenance, right? Then you begin to look at the concept of voting itself, and you realize, well, isn't that really a quantitative thing? You just get one vote, and clunkily, this has more votes than that, and so that wins. Does that solve the problem qualitatively? Well, I don't know. So you begin to refine the notion of what it means to lend your democratic voice of the people who are competent to lend to this defense and homeostasis of the group system. And also not being crazy right-wing reactionaries like Putin are always going to be looking for ways to coordinate with other groups, to respect them, not to try to conjure up excuses to go to war against them, like this guy has in charge of his imperialist kleptocracy, as he is. Putting before the United Nations a call to anti-racism, anti xenophobia, against anti-Semitism. The guy is like completely full of shit. He's like, you can see where he's involved. Someone like Dugan would be like dipping from the same trough. The Orthodox Church. I got to come to the conversation that I heard between those guys the other day too. And Tan Staffel. I was listening to Tan Staffel was talking to a couple of Nazis in Sweden. Now these are nice, not as Nazis go. They want to call themselves National Socialists. As Nazis go, these sounded like nice guy, as nice as a Nazi can be, right? Okay, I'll come back to that in a second. But where was I? Oh yeah. Let's stick with Tan Staffel, because Tan, again, he's a computer nerd, a STEM guy, and finding that frequently, as Captain Chaos has said, that these types make for rotten philosophers, and that's what I'm finding to be the case. Now we owe much to the STEM types. I don't want to deride them. The website that I have, the brilliance of it, the internet, cracking the genetic code, on and on. I don't want to say that these people aren't absolutely crucial and central to our existence. That's not it. But science and technology is not the same thing as philosophy. So that's why whether he knows it or not, that Tan Staffel has taken issue with me, because it's just he doesn't know better. He's driven by his own, quote, logical superiority. And he is saying that they want to define evil for us as if evil is something that can exist in nature. This is what he's saying in the conversation with these Swedish Nazis. And then he goes on to say that no, it's a group. Only a group can decide what's moral and what's not. You see, the problem there is that he's not employing the interactional unit of analysis that a communicologist would, which would see the interplay of the universal and the group particulate that he wants to say that the YKW always want whites to take the universal morality. That may well be, but the opposite is not necessarily the full standard bearer of what morality is to become. That is to say, for example, he said, you can't say there's no evil in nature. You can't say what. Well, if you look at evil, I mean, if you consider, maybe we could consider evil, indeed, as, for example, at least having the property of doing harm, grievous harm to somebody when you don't have to. That would seem pretty evil to me. Just a thought, as a working hypothesis that it might be possible. And again, his problem, because he is a STEM nerd, not a philosopher, and he didn't like my use of the word praxis. He tried to say it's jargon. Excuse me for speaking Aristotle to you, STEM nerd. Praxis is the human world where humans have, where people may be held or where they interact. They're not perfectly predictable, but they are afforded accountability, coherence, therefore agency, and potential warrant and warranted assertability, correctivity, as we say. In that realm, you can discuss evil indeed. There's moral agency. We can think in terms of, did you have to do it? Or did you know better? Anyway, that happens in praxis. So he's framed it wrong when telling us there's no evil in nature. The Nazis are big on pure nature. Hitler was. That's what he thought that he was doing. That's based on natural fallacy. Now, Ten is obviously a very intelligent guy. Much more refined in his logical capacities than I could ever hope to be in this lifetime. But, unfortunately, it allows him to do some gymnastics around things and to rationalize things that the better judgment, phronesis, what Aristotle would call phronesis, wouldn't pass muster with better judgment, practical judgment. You don't go trying to justify Hitler and Nazism. When for obvious reasons, and I've diagnosed. I'm very satisfied with my diagnosis that this is an epistemological blunder based on natural fallacy and a lack of, therefore, of correctivity. That's why Hitler kept fighting, even when it was clear that they weren't going to win. Lacks correctivity. That's Hitler said. That's nature. Might makes right, and if the Germans couldn't win under my Nazi auspices, then they deserve to lose. That's the will of nature. And unfortunately, at their worst, there's a female aspect, an unsocialized female aspect at its worst that's gonna go for that. Just breed with the winner. That's where it becomes dangerous, and that's where the situation of modernity is dangerous. When females are not socialized in the realm of praxis with borders and bounds, they are going to incite genetic competition. Brutal, destructive genetic competition. Okay. So what else did I want to talk about? So that's the way I see things shaping up in a very fundamental level between the West and Putin. That the West is in the throes of this red cape of this red caping of correctivity that becomes liberalism, and in marginality that becomes runaway liberalism at the behest of the YKW. And I don't approve of blaming America per se. Its system, yeah, which is an Enlightenment catastrophe. The right wingers and the liberals who take the payoffs, as it were, that its exaggerations under YKW auspices entail. Yeah, those kinds are the problem. And I don't. Again, this platform is not blaming it all on the kosher folks. It takes the complicitness, and you're not going to hear that from the likes of Mark Collette's friend David Duke. That's not. He's going to. These types are going to make everything the kosher folks, and you're also not going to hear from them a rejection of Mein Kampf because we don't see it as the solution as as Hitler's solution. We're not supremacist. We're not imperialist. We're not about killing people, let alone genociding people. We're not about exploiting people. We seek for ways to trade. That's the kind of thing that if Putin was any kind of man would be looking to do. He would say, okay, well, we need some more of the gas reserves from Ukraine, or we need its wheat, or we need sea access. There's no reason why he couldn't negotiate for that. I mean, you listen to the Ukrainians even now. They say, "Oh, we don't hate Russians." You think they're not going to engage in trade with Russia if that's what Putin wanted to do? You think that they want to send nukes and chemical weapons into Russia because and if nothing else, and risk that being done right back to them? This is crazy. This is no excuse for Putin to do this. And don't go in and don't let anybody tell you that the right thing to do is to escalate this conflict by continue to come to the call of this, what's his name, Yeletsky, the president of Ukraine, to step up the war and no. Tell that guy to step down and let him install his puppet for now. Right? End the war. Putin, what's going to make you happy, little guy? Install your fucking puppet. Okay? I know, no NATO. Just do. Okay. And then, over the long haul, see how the true Ukrainians take their nation back, and have done the world a favor enough in the martyrs that they've sustained, as people have rallied to the cause of ethno-nationalism. Whether our enemies would acknowledge that or not. I mean, the enemies are, the people would impose liberalism upon us. But what we really, really, really got to be careful of, and I'm not optimistic, I'm not overly optimistic for sure, is that what our enemies are going to do, I mean, the enemies of European peoples and their homeostasis, what they're going to do, genus and species, what they're going to do is say, well, this is all the more reason why you've got to be liberal. Oh, our liberal democracy, Joel Kotkin, Walt Mearsheimer, Timothy Snyder. It means, everybody from everywhere should be able to come into your country and vote. It makes you powerful. No, that's what they're going to try to do, of course. And people like Conops and Claire Carr are going to try to smooth that process along. Okay. I'll look through my notes and see what else I was hell-bent on saying in this show. So, correctivity is applied to recent podcasts. Oh yeah, I have to talk about the Orthodox nationalist and Mark Collette in his favorite fucking book. I did that one. Talking about a note that I'm looking at now. I talked about Ten Staffel's thing. I talk about how this war demonstrates the efficacy of this platform. I talked about the contradiction that Morgoth runs into in saying that, well, we prefer Ukrainian refugees because of EGI. Then you'd have to wrestle with the fact that Russians are close genetically to Ukrainians and yet they're killing them. So they're not exactly sympathetic in that case. So context matters, and that's over the head of guest worker in Morgoth. These guys just aren't good enough philosophically. That's the bottom line. That's a reversing truth. I guess, yeah, the only thing among my notes I'll have to talk about is the Orthodox nationalist and Mark Collette. I couldn't believe how these guys are defending Putin. I mean, here this guy is. Was it Raphael Johnson? He was at the Voice of Reason when I was there at the same time. I couldn't believe this guy. This guy is supposed to be an Orthodox priest, and I hear nothing of real sympathy and concern for the Ukrainian people. Just like defending, the economics and geopolitics of Putin. Is there sick in the head for his stupid religion, his stupid kosher religion? I mean, Mark Collette. Yes, of course. And it doesn't excuse Putin one iota. no, Yeletsky or whatever his name is, the Ukrainian president, uh, he shouldn't be joined in a protracted hot war against Putin. I mean, if they're able to contain it to Ukraine and whatever, and those who are doing the fighting insist on fighting, I hope they win. But this way, as I see it, is going to lead to a lot more deaths and a lot more destruction, in addition to potentially escalating to bringing the rest of the world into a cataclysmic war. And they're probably not, of themselves, because of themselves they're not likely to win, and Putin's going to install his puppet anyway. So the better thing to do is to call his bluff, allow him to install his puppet, back off from the fighting, so that more people don't get killed, more architecture and housing and infrastructure and national treasures aren't destroyed. And you have a clear path, a clear logic of meaning and action, which everybody understands that this situation, this imposition is obnoxious to you, it's obnoxious to the world, and you can begin with the world's backing, retaking your country for the distinct and now ever more recognized as distinct Ukrainian peoples, wresting their sovereignty, their homeostasis, their systemic autonomy from this disgusting reactionary tyrant, Vladimir Putin. I'm glad that I was never one of these guys who was doing who thought he was okay. But thanks to Kumiko for her it's sort of like her detail to look critically upon the Russian Federation. So she encouraged me to look critically upon them, when more so than I'd be inclined to be. And I say that I'm more so than I'm inclined to be because I'm not against the Russian people. I like the Russian people. I feel very kindred to them, in fact. But this regime, I'm not sympathetic to. I mean, I'm sympathetic to, even to extent, even to Dugin, in as much as he looks upon the liberalism of the West as a problem, just not his prescription, certainly not in the Orthodox Church, and certainly not in Eurasianism and Putin's imperialist kleptocracy, because that's what it is. It's not this is not an ethno-nationalist. And, he's, pretty much putting across a liberal ideology, as is Putin, even if they don't call it that. But it's an imperialist kleptocracy, and that's not ethno-nationalism. That is at odds with ethno-nationalism. I think that we should tactfully join in with the Japanese, the Koreans, and others, even the Chinese to an extent, to how should I say, humble the Russian Federation into an ethno-state. Help them as we must establish industry, self-sustaining industry, as opposed to having to rely mostly on extraction and sales of resources, straight up raw. And provide through these means a means to not the resources and the access, international access that they need to warm water ports and whatnot. It's definitely not the thing to do to defend the airspace, and it's definitely not the thing to do to. I don't think it's the thing to do, nor to increase. Just keep providing munitions to the Ukrainians that would lead to this war becoming protracted. No, the war should be de-escalated rapidly. Okay, I'm going to put in the link now. Let's see here if anybody wants to join. Wait a minute. I don't think that's it. It's not. I'm grabbing the link. Okay. I will not be talking to Claire Call. I will not be talking to ConOps. Enough of that nonsense. Claire Call, I mean, it's a shame because, she has some thoughts about gender, and interesting to hear her talk about, a proper valuation on sex and whatnot, and slut shaming. I think these are necessary ideas, and she's a hard worker too. I mean, she'll take your show and a show of mine and add timestamps to it, which is a really neat thing for her to do. It's a shame. She could be an asset, but a couple really bad things about her. First of all, she's trying to impose this bullshit. I mean, for her to try to impose that nonsense, for her to try to decide what our moral order should be, how it should be. That's one, and then to try to get me in trouble, trying to say that I'm, that I hate whomever when I don't, and whatnot, and then I want to expel them, which I never said that. The concept of the DNA nations is to is simply about our genetic groupings, and The kosher folks are another. They're a different group. I don't hate them. I do recognize them as uh, having conflicts of interests, at least at times, and at times, serious conflicts of interest. And that's all. And it's true. And again, if someone like me doesn't say it, then you're going to have people like these Nazi true believers acting like they're the only ones who take this issue seriously. And maybe they want that because it's going to call their diasporic traitors. I don't know, but I don't. It's not only. I mean, you would think that the Nazis would be kind of, if they cared about European people, maybe they don't. Maybe they think it's okay to go around killing French people, killing English people, and killing Slavic people who are inconvenient to them somehow, and looked upon as inferior. I don't think that that's, on top of their epistemological blunder, I don't think that's the way to win friends and influence people. Do you? It's unbelievable. Unbelievable. Okay, so there's the link. And maybe it's a good idea to keep this a short show if nobody's going to join me. But I'll relax if and give somebody a chance to join in if they'd like. Maybe I send the link. See if by emailing it, somebody will. There's a couple of people that I'd like to talk to. I'd like to talk to Per, my Swedish friend. He's not going to be up this time of day. Never mind. I won't even bother. He's in my same time zone. We need to talk to Per one of these days. It's a good time in the United States. I'm kind of patting myself on the back for the time I started the show, because when I started it at 2:00 here, it was 1:00 in London, which on a Friday night I think is a good hour. People are might be starting to come back from where they were, and then it would be 8:00 at night in New York, 7:00 in Chicago, 6:00 in Denver, and 5:00 in Los Angeles and San Francisco. All reasonable hours. And now, what time is it now? It's 3:30, 3:40. So it is. And it's going on. $3:00 in the morning, or 3:30, 2:30 in the morning in 2:40 in the morning in London. Right. 10:00 at night in New York, going on. 9:00 in Chicago, 8:00 in Denver, and 7:00 in Los Angeles and San Francisco. So those are good times for them. I guess a lot of people are not on, are going over to Odyssey, the kind of people that would care about these things. I'll eventually shift. I've got to put some of my stuff over to BitChute, more of my stuff there, and then I'll start moving my stuff and operations, at least in the dual sense, over to Odyssey as well. The way I see it, it's a test of how careful I've thought things out. I should be able to say them on YouTube, and I should be able to say, I should be able to state my position to anybody. It should be that morally sound, and it is. And you know what? When it comes to things like Telegram, which is that was Russian controlled, anyway. It comes to things like Telegram and Odyssey, you have these, or Gab, right? You have these all these. It's a nest of these kind of I don't know if it's a nest, but I right now I feel like I'm just jumping into a place where there's this cacophony of crazy right wingers, and I enjoy the difference for now. I'm still on Twitter, and I never liked Gab, and you know, I was greeted there by guest worker in the most vile way to begin with, predictably. So we'll be on YouTube for now. I see that Joel Davis is going to be talking with Mark Collette and his maybe about his favorite book, Mein Kampf. I don't know. And it and Mark Collette is associated with David Duke. Again, everything is the YKW. Hitler was a man of peace. Made all these peace offerings to England that just goes to show how peaceful he was. I mean, it's insane. So this is where Joel Davis and you know, this is a kid, you know, and this is what the right wing does to people. You know, it's inherently unstable, and it's going to go through all these stupid permutations. I mean, these people are very they're smart enough to be really stupid, is what it comes down to. Dangerously stupid. Well, I don't want to give them too much credit. Let's just say smart enough to be stupid. So that's on the agenda. That talk is coming up tomorrow. They're going to be talking with Greg Johnson. Speaking of another right winger who really is, you know, is very smart, and he's not, you know, he's really not on the top echelon philosophically or intellectually. Smart as he is, and he's very smart, and he does some things very well. He's among the best of what there is. I've been asked, I mean, like who you know, I like. You know, Greg Johnson, he's among the best, but he has those vulnerabilities, which allows in really bad right-wing elements and enemy elements even. Or directly, I mean, deliberately, specifically, not just reactionary elements. Deliberately, you know, literal enemy elements. Richard Houck has done some stuff, but I've also found him wanting at times. But we're talking about the people who are doing some of the who I tend to like, and so, I mean, in terms of, have a good deal of respect for what their work, like a lot of the stuff they do in their general positions, while I have some serious reservations as well. Who was this Ukrainian woman who's promoting the intermarium idea? I think she's cute. I really do. I wish she could. And besides that, I like her. I like her patriotism. A really patriotic woman. A woman who's dedicated to her people. That just that gets my juices flowing. It really does. What was her name again? It's in my email. Was it Elena? Oh yeah, it was Elena Semenyaka. Yeah. She either has dark hair or dyed dark hair, and unfortunately, though, she's associated with the Azov battalion and whatever Nazi and Bandera associations that they have. But I don't deny, in as much as they are nationalists, that part of them, I certainly appreciate or endorse that aspect. Just the basic nationalism, not the insanity. And I like even better how she's connecting it with the intermarium idea, which was generated by Pilsudski. I talk about how from a Polish perspective, for example, how Bandera would be evil when he would be. And did he really have to kill a whole village of Polish men, women, and children? I don't think so. But he's looked upon as a hero to some Ukrainian nationalists, even has a street named after him in Kiev. I think it's wrong. But I have to be careful not to be too self-righteous, because I don't know. I haven't researched it and I don't know a lot about it, but I've been heard at least once that Pilsudski has some blood on his hands too, and he's looked upon as a great national hero. I don't think that he was. I'm sure that he was not as randomly barbaric as Bandera, but he was a ruthless nationalist doing what he thought he had to do. I say that in the name of course, respecting Pilsudski largely, and not entirely either. No, that's another. I don't want to get into that tonight. Well, okay. Let me just mention briefly that Pilsudski. I like the fact that he was at least a bit socialistic. Of course, nationalistic. That he viewed Felix Dzerzhinsky and the Soviet Union as his arch enemy. All good. And he fought brilliantly, fought a brilliant campaign against the Red Army in 1920 called the Miracle over Warsaw. He also fought the retaking of the Poznan area, the ancient capital of Poles, in the Wielkopolska uprising. But he was borderline civic nationalist. He was a civic. he felt that if the kosher folks, you know, pledged allegiance to Poland, that was good enough. And I don't think that the reality bears that out. What I do maintain in his defense is that he was enough of a Polish nationalist so that, if he lived to be 200 years old and saw the patterns unfolding, he would see that loyalty to Polish people would not be upheld through kosher genetics. So we could say that in his ultimate defense, I think. Whereas Roman Dmowski was considered the father of Polish nationalism, was wise to the kosher folks right at the beginning. He thought that Piłsudski was engaged in egregious folly and making a huge mistake, that they should never be included as recognized as Polish nationals. And but unfortunately, Roman Dmowski was he was a social Darwinist. He was a right winger. Those are two bad things against him. And the Nazis tended to view him, even though he was aligned with them in that respect, it was more of a symmetrical relationship. They viewed him more conflictually because he was more antagonistic to the Germans. He viewed them as smarter and more dangerous than the Soviets, and he felt he had a more friendly attitude towards Eastern, especially the Belarusians and the Ukrainians, and for better or worse, that was his position. And he was one of the ones, Dmowski was, which was bargaining most ardently for Poland to have lands in the Versailles Treaty. He thought that Danzig should be Gdansk, should be Polish. He didn't get his way. It became neutral. You don't hear that in, the highly Germanic America of the United States, and, they're among their historical popularizers. They say, well, Hitler just wanted Danzig back. Well, it wasn't Poland's to give. The United Nations made it neutral. So, that's the way they'll put it. And then Dmowski wanted a bit more of Pomerania, which is the seacoast west of Gdansk, but not all of it. And he wanted Schneidermühl, Piła. And that was the only thing he didn't get. He didn't get Gdansk. He didn't get a little bit more about Pomerania. He didn't get Schneidermühl. So he wasn't like really outrageous in his claims in terms of retaking lands that Frederick the Great had stolen from Poland. He was a bit ambitious in his hopes for in the East. He would have, if the Versailles Treaty had granted it, or the Paris conference, he would have gotten more of Belarus, and Ukraine would have become part of Poland. That was denied. But what a true Belarusian nationalist would tell you today, and this kind of blends into my concept of what I think should be in Ukraine today, what a true Belarusian nationalist would tell you today, and maybe a Ukrainian nationalist would tell you today, is that would have been better than falling under the auspices of Russia, which they did. Because they would have been able to slowly work their ethno-national difference, which there is. The Belarusians are chauvinistic. They think that they're different from Poles, just as they think they're different from Russians, and they would have slowly, if not cultivated, wrested their difference as a nation from Polish control. Just as I'm saying, the Ukrainians will wrest their difference from Russian control if they just do. I don't know how do we put this. Fake them a little bit if they just step back from the notion of hot war, even step back even from guerrilla war for just let the Russians install their puppet and then go to work with all the international resource and nationalist fervor and sublimated will to revenge to retake their nation. Okay then. So I'm gonna unless somebody joins me to talk, I'm gonna wait another 2.5 minutes so it rounds out to an even 2 hours, and we will have still 3 hours, 3.5 hours to this remaining month of StreamYard. Next weekend is the last weekend of this StreamYard month, so plenty of time to talk more as events and the war unfold. As terrible, and Putin, you suck. You really suck. What you're doing is evil. You don't have to do this. So if Van Stoffel thinks that evil doesn't exist in nature, and Hitler thinks that evil doesn't exist in nature, well, maybe it doesn't exist in nature, but it exists in the reality of human relations. And Hitler was evil, and what Vladimir Putin is doing is evil.